Today, hopefully, we're going to be getting on the line Mike van der Westhuizen, who's from Citadel, to discuss the whole idea of the budget coming up soon. We are going to have a new budget coming up at the end of the month, and what we really want to try and understand is what to expect, what's going on. We've got a country in flux. We've got a country that is really reeling between one crisis and the other and trying to get everything in balance. Ultimately, it's all about having enough money for the country to run efficiently, for there to be enough money for things to be able to run, and for the government to be able to stamp its authority on certain government institutions and to run them correctly. Yes, there's been a lot of wastage, there's been a lot of damage done, but that has to be corrected. And really the budget is about how we put all this together, how the finite amount of money that the government has, that it's collected from us as taxpayers, and that it is borrowed, is used to run the country. Included in there are some major items like how much debt does the government have? In other words, how much debt do they have that they have to pay back at a certain date, but before they pay the debt back, they need to service the interest on that debt. So that's a very, very big concern, because that's really good money after bad. You're paying interest on money that you had to borrow, and the quicker we can get out of that, the better, but it's unlikely we're going to get out of it anytime soon. And the other thing that we really need to do is, if we've got a major public service section in the government, a lot of people employed, a huge amount of people employed by the government through different organizations, and all those need to be brought under control. And then there's the looming idea of tax. What is going to happen with tax? But I'm not the expert. On the line with me is Mike van der Westhuizen. Mark, welcome to Chai FM.
Hi, thanks, Alex.
Great. Mark, I don't know if you've heard the intro. I thought you were online, then I realized you weren't online. But let's maybe jump straight into it. This year's budget is going to be really exciting. Besides the EFF doing their shenanigans in Parliament, what do you think the Minister is thinking about at 2 o'clock in the morning when he can't sleep?
Yeah, I mean, the Minister's got a super interesting job at this budget. I think I've said for the last three budgets, and MTB guesses that it's going to be the most important budget. This one probably will be. So essentially, Moody's as last rating agency downgrade to sub-investment grade is sterling, and the Minister try and rein budget deficit that has started to get even more out of control, debt to GDP trajectory that's started to get more out of control. So, I mean, essentially what Minister Moody has to come up with is a plan to, in essence, save 50 billion rand a year for the next 3 years. And, the levers that he has to try and achieve this at this point, there's fewer and fewer levers. And without, he's going to eventually have to disappoint somebody, whether it be the taxpayer or Labour. He's going to make some tough decisions.
Upsetting people is one thing, but upsetting people who will then destabilize the economy because of it is another story. And that's the challenge we have here in South Africa, is this constant seesaw between doing what we feel is correct for the government and correct for the country, and at the same time bringing all the role players on board, so that we have a sort of stable ship going forward. Do you think the Minister will be able to balance practical populist economics with proper sound economic and fiscal policy?
Yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, policy implementation has been probably one of the biggest issues with government. The plans that are put in place and, the new development plan, et cetera, they're all great. But I think it's going to be tough for the Minister to try and balance, sound economic rationale and good budgeting without upsetting sort of stakeholders. So one big lever to pull in terms of saving that 50 billion a year is to try and cut the wage bill. And we have seen really a lot of unrest around any sort of wage settlement, and cutting wage bill at this stage of the cycle is going to be tough. We're still in the middle of the 2-year wage agreement, and so any meaningful cuts now might be an issue. The important thing to look at is if the Minister can allude to further cuts down the line as the next World's negotiations start. And I mean, the one thing that has worked in favour of perhaps of Treasury is that inflation's been quite low. So in terms of pushing for lower inflationary increases going forward might be a good lever to pull. So for example, the current agreement average increase of about 6.8%. We've seen inflation surprise quite nicely to the downside. So I mean, if government can push for less than 5%, even 5.5%, that's part of the battle that's won. But it's still, we need very, very strict and stringent implementation of that.
What do you feel is going to happen with tax? At the end of the day, South Africans just feel they're taxed to the hilt. A lot of their money goes to government. They then have to spend a lot of money on things, on services that should be provided, like healthcare, like security, like education, and they're paying it out of their own pocket. And now there's a chance that tax will go up. Do you think, number one, that personal tax will go up? And do you think, number two, that the VAT rate will go up?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one. So yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of levers pulled by government in terms of tax increase, and yeah, the consumer from a VAT perspective, we know there was a VAT hike 2 years ago. From personal income tax, I mean, just the bracket creep and the tax rates going up. I think it wouldn't be a great idea at this stage for a minister to raise personal income tax. I think it is counterproductive to a stage where people, all kinds of taxpayers look for reasons and ways to not pay tax, and I think that's counterproductive. I think VAT is becoming increasingly an option to raise VAT by another 1 percentage point. I mean, the probability in terms of popularity from a political standpoint might be tricky. We saw with the last VAT hike that they had to go back and sort of zero rate certain items, and so it has become a bit of an issue. But I think I'd probably assign a higher probability to a VAT hike than to a personal income tax hike. But that said, there is an option to also to include a higher tax bracket for the sort of I'll put it in inverted commas, the ultra wealthy in the country, and that is an option.
It's interesting because when VAT was increased, we thought it was just this rogue minister who was sort of put in place, wasn't quite sure what he was doing, increased VAT out of left field that hadn't been increased in forever, so to speak. And all of a sudden, piggybacking on that, we're having another increase coming forward. And is that most probably a desperate stab by government because it's the only place that they can sort of get a decent amount of revenue relatively easy and quickly?
Yeah, correct.
Welcome back to 101.9 FM. It's 19 minutes past 12, and I apologize. We've tried every means of technology available to us, and we just could not get a clear line with Mike van der Westhuizen, who's a portfolio manager at Citadel, and he really has written a beautiful press release. If anybody wants it, as usual, just be in touch with me and I will send it through to you. But let me maybe just highlight some of the points that Mike had written about. He's basically broken down the situation in the country at the moment from a financial point of view into a few areas. The first one is revenue under pressure. End of the day, the government is not pulling in the tax revenue that it needs to get itself, to get its budget to balance. In other words, people are earning less, people are emigrating, corporate earnings are not there, corporates are not investing, therefore the future revenues are looking muted, and all that has a knock-on effect on less and less coming in. So that's really one of the major problems that it has. The other thing is, if you and I don't spend money in the shops, we don't buy new cars, VAT gets affected, and what we need to do is we need to bolster the VAT income or the VAT taxability from the government's point of view in order to increase their coffers, but that can only be done if people are spending more. One of the ways to stimulate that is to drop interest rates, because if you and I can borrow money at a cheaper rate, we'll have more money to spend. If we're paying less on our bond, we can use the difference to go and spend on things that we otherwise would not have spent, or we can then fulfill our spending potential on basic items and therefore again increase VAT. So it's a very, very tricky thing as to how that all works. The other thing is the public sector wage bill. This is an ongoing problem. One thing we saw that it happened under President Zuma was that the public sector wage bill just ballooned. In other words, more and more people were employed by government in different areas, and therefore they created a tremendous amount of employment. It dropped the unemployment rate at the time, and it also increased the tax revenue because now more people were earning, they were paying tax. But what the outcome of that was, when you wrung the whole dirty laundry story out, was that you've now got a wage bill that is bloated. Got a lot of people employed doing a job. There is a consensus that there's tremendous inefficiencies, there's not maximizing of potential, people are not encouraged and are not incentivized to work and to produce at the maximum. And I'm saying that's a generalization. There are clearly many people who are, but what we need is a lean, mean operating machine when it comes to government, and we certainly don't have that. We have a bloated, slow, staffed system which it just allows people to really go through the motions day by day, collect a salary that you and I as taxpayers are funding, and we are not really getting value for that. But there's another side to it, and that's the human side to it. It's easy to talk about it if we were talking about maybe planting 3 fields less of middies, but these are families. Every person part of that 45% is a person who has a family, who has dependents. Every person who gets laid off has a knock-on effect on the economy. If we want to keep morale in the country up, if we want to keep crime down, if we want to keep productivity going, people need to be employed. So there needs to be some sort of private-public partnership where people are able to take the skills that they've learnt in government and use them elsewhere. We need to encourage entrepreneurship. But I'll go on. Those are my thoughts. Let's see what the minister comes up with. The other thing is the state-owned enterprises, the SOEs. I wish I could come up with another word for SOE instead of state-owned enterprises, because they're just a drain. My feeling is, and what I want to say now does not reflect the feeling of Chai FM or the policies of Chai FM. It's my personal feeling, is that the writing was on the wall many, many, many years ago. Cadre deployment, black economic empowerment in SOEs has cost the SOEs their life. Yes, it's important. BE is a major and a fundamental and a crucial factor of the new South Africa. People who did not have a chance before, who were held back before, need to have a fresh lease in life and given an advantage over those of us, and I include myself, who've always had an advantage. But it needs to come in areas where people can grow, they can upskill, and they can develop. When you have an airline like a SAA that is broken, there's no other ways to put it. Eskom is broken. Denel, broken. Transnet, let's not even talk about that. The road agency, wherever you turn, you just got this litany of things not working. And I really believe that if Minister Tito Mboweni could do what Minister of Finance Trevor Manuel did in the early years, in the years of the late President Nelson Mandela, and turn around and say populist economics is great, but we need to have realistic economics. We must not make promises to people that we have no intention of keeping, and that there's no ways in this lifetime that we can keep. We need to tell people the harsh realities and the truth. And we need to go back to basics and sound economic principles. Now is the time to strip away all the dead wood, to cut away all the dead skin, and to get to the crux of the matter, and let's run these institutions correctly. Because if we do that, number one, we will stop wasting money. Number two, we will upskill people with the skills and the proficiency they need to do the jobs correctly. So when they do arrive at their position, they are competent, they are proud, they are effective, and they are ruthless, because they've got the certainty that they know what they're doing, and they can just look forward and get the job done, and not dilly-daddle around issues. They can make decisions, they can make hard decisions, because they know the government is behind them, the public is behind them, we trust them, and they've proven themselves. and they've got the skills. So that's what my feeling is that needs to happen now. We need to really just take it all away, look at it again, and allow things to happen. The fact that SAA is in debt rescue, is in rescue at the moment, is the best thing that could have happened to it again, in my opinion. But we need to stop the noise. Yes, there will be damage. But what? Are we going to have a short-term damage now? And when I talk about damage, these are people. It's myself. It's my family. These are people that could lose their jobs. I don't work for SAA, but there's somebody like me who does, who's going to get the axe and who's going to lose his or her job, and their families are going to suffer. But what needs to happen is we need to allow the process to go through so we can rebuild something of substance and something that is substantial. It's going to be run on sound business principles. That's the bottom line. And if we don't do it now, we are going to end up in 10 years' time with a disaster on our hands that somehow reflects some of our northern neighbors, Zimbabwe in particular, that is just dysfunctional in every single way. And it's the case of the frog in the pot. If you put a frog in a pot of cold water and you put the pot on the stove and you let it boil, the frog doesn't realize that it's boiling to death and it dies. But if you take a frog and you throw it in a pot of boiling water, it jumps out, it gets scolded, it says, I don't want to be here. Because it realizes it's unnatural, it's not where it's meant to be. And this conditioning that's happening in South Africa, where mediocrity has become the norm, and a lot of things don't function the way they should, needs to be arrested. Minister Tito Mboweni is a man who's proven himself time and time again in many different positions. I think we should all say a little prayer that those who want to stop growth, those who want to stop the country getting back on the correct trajectory, should just be silenced. They should be quiet and allow people of valor and people of substance to continue doing what they need to do for the sake of the whole country. And again, the knock-on effect of that is that if we can get these institutions working, so much so, it'll be better for everyone else. Right, let's carry on. We've got a downgrade coming. What a downgrade simply means is that it has two major effects, in my opinion. One is the secret, the unseen, the silent, the almost ghostly effect of a downgrade, and that's the tainting, that's the name-shaming, that's the title, that's the stigma that our government gets and our country gets, that you guys are just not good enough, and therefore you are now being downgraded, and it has a negative morale effect on the entire country. A dark cloud hangs over the country. People don't want to pick their heads up above the parapet. People don't want to get out and say, yes, I want to build. I want to put my shoulder to the grindstone, because there's just this negativity. Practically, it costs us more to operate. It costs us more to borrow money, and it costs us more to borrow money usually in certain segments of borrowing, and all that just means that we spend more of our taxpayers' money servicing debt. And last but not least is really what we need to do is we just need to read the mood. We need to what the minister needs to do is understand what's happening in this country, and what is happening. First and foremost is that there is very little to no investment. If you speak to anybody in the business world, you speak to anybody in mining, in manufacturing, in industry, they'll say to you there is the potential, but everybody is sitting on their hands. No one's spending money. There's cash on the balance sheets that are not being spent. Yes, there's a lot of companies that don't have cash. There's a lot of companies that are strained. But the problem is we are not going forward without investment. And the mood is negative. And it really takes a major mind shift to set that. But again, apparently there are certain ex-senior business people in South Africa who are walking through Parliament at the moment in Pretoria. They are walking through, they are there, they are working on the ground, they're working behind the scenes. And one thing that President Cyril Ramaphosa definitely has is an incredible network of phenomenal business people who have built empires in South Africa, who have done so ethically, who have done so correctly, who have done so by employing a huge amount of people, upskilling, creating jobs, and allowing opportunities to happen. And those are the people, without mentioning any names, that are now sort of the ghosts behind that are really working very hard to get things done. The reason we know this is because opposition parties are raising hell about these people being in Parliament and what are they doing there and what are they doing working through the Herbert Baker building on the hill in Pretoria. They're there because they've been brought in so that their skills can be deployed to make our country better for all of us. So Mike van der Westhuizen wasn't online, so I gave you my thought of what I think needs to happen. But what needs to happen in a nutshell is a brave, harsh, clinical, and sometimes ruthless decisions need to be made by government based on sound business principles. And every South African needs to do their part. Me, you, everybody. We need to pay our tax. We need to pay it accurately and on time. We need to obey the law. We need to keep upskilling ourselves. We need to get our CPD points done in whatever industry we are, because there are certain areas in this country that are outstanding. Medicine, banking, insurance. We are world leaders in all these areas by a country mile. We have got a great country. We've just got to keep our head down. And just to end off, at the Discovery Leadership Summit, they had a previous American president over here, and he turned around to the crowd and he said, "You've got an amazing country. Don't mess it up." So it's in everyone's hands. If everybody just does the right thing and continues to pressurize government to do what we feel is correct for the government, for the country as a whole, not just for individuals, not just for minority groups, and not just for majority groups, but for everybody, we are on a trajectory that cannot be stopped and that will really bring prosperity to this country.